He flew out of Albuquerque that night with a small carry-on bag and a quiet sense of purpose. Somewhere above the Arizona desert, staring into the dark sky, he closed his eyes for a few moments. For the first time since the incident, he exhaled without weight. He hadn't solved it all, but he'd begun something. And sometimes, that's where real change lives, not in the noise, but in the effort. Because stories like Leonard's aren't just meant to be watched. They're meant to wake us up to what we tolerate, what we excuse, and what we choose to challenge when no one's filming. If this story moved you, made you pause, think, or feel, pass it on. And stay tuned for more true human stories that reflect who we are and who we can be when it truly matters. Later that week, he visited a Norjet training center in Albuquerque. No announcement, no cameras, just Leonard walking in, shaking hands, and taking a seat in the back row of a customer service session. When the session ended, he asked to speak. I know how easy it is to pretend this stuff doesn't happen, to say we're too busy, that it's not our job to notice. But I've sat in that seat, and if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. He didn't lecture, he shared. He spoke as a man who had loaded luggage, written policy, flown aircraft, and once been made to feel small in a space his name helped build. Afterward, by the coffee machine, a young woman named Jasmine approached. You ever think of just walking away from all this? She asked. After what happened? Leonard paused, then smiled. I did. But then I remembered change only happens when someone stays in the room long enough to fix what broke. Excuse me, miss, would you mind giving me a hand with this? The voice was gentle, polite, not the kind to demand anything. Leonard Mayfield stood beneath the overhead bin, holding a sleek navy duffel bag, though he looked strong enough to lift it himself. A lingering ache in his left shoulder, thanks to back-to-back meetings and a tight layover, made him hesitate. The flight attendant turned. She was slender, sharp-featured, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. Her name tag read Elise. She glanced at Leonard briefly, more a scan than a look, and then moved on, as though he hadn't spoken at all. From the corner of her mouth, she muttered just loud enough, "You people always need something." A man in seat 2 shifted awkwardly but said nothing. Leonard didn't flinch. At 65, he had grown used to moments like these. On the surface, he was unassuming, charcoal sweater, khakis, glasses perched low on his nose, silver hair neatly trimmed. You'd expect him to be a professor, maybe a retired teacher, not the man who'd once flown fighter jets, walked through war zones, and later, helped build an airline from the ground up. This flight wasn't for leisure. He was here to observe. He tucked the bag in himself, nodded once, and sat down in seat to C, window seat, first class. As the engines roared and the plane rolled down the runway, Leonard rested his hands on his lap, gaze fixed outside. He wasn't upset. Not yet. He was evaluating, measuring. Elise returned to begin the safety demonstration. She skipped Leonard's row entirely. No eye contact. No gestures. When she reached the exit row, her tone shifted, light, friendly. Oh, you don't need the demo, she chuckled to a man in a sports coat. You look like you've got it handled. The cabin laughed. Leonard didn't. The aircraft reached cruising altitude. The drink cart rolled down the aisle. Leonard, reading a business magazine, looked up as Elise served the passenger beside him. Again, she ignored him. Excuse me, he said, voice calm. May I have a black coffee, please? She paused, gave him a look like he'd just asked her to clean his shoes. We're a bit busy, she snapped. I'll get to you when I can. She poured juice for the man beside him, a techie judging by the laptop stickers, who now stared intently at his seatbelt, clearly uncomfortable. Leonard gave a small nod, returned to his magazine. But he wasn't reading anymore. He was thinking. Not just about what she'd said, but about everyone else's silence. How people witnessed disrespect and chose to stay quiet. How subtle the ugliness could be. How polite cruelty could seem, in public. He looked at the seat in front of him. The airline logo was embroidered on the leather. His airline. Just a month earlier, Leonard had quietly been appointed CEO of Skylinks Airlines. He hadn't made it public yet. This was his first anonymous route check. No press, no photos, just honest feedback. And now, here it was. By the time they flew over the Southwest, the cabin atmosphere had shifted. Not obviously, but enough. Elise continued to avoid his row. Laughter in the front, silence in his corner. She reappeared to chat with a passenger behind him. Another drink, Mr. Dawson? She asked, sweet as honey. Scotch, if it's not too much trouble. For you? Of course, she beamed, fetching the glass. Then, as she passed Leonard again, she stopped. Still waiting on that coffee? She asked, tone sharp and just loud enough for others to hear. Just making sure you're not planning to file a complaint. We do our best up here. Leonard looked up, no anger in his face, just calm. No complaint. Just a coffee. Something about his poise irritated her more than if he'd snapped. She forced a smile and walked away. A man in 3A leaned forward and whispered, "That was out of line." Leonard met his eyes briefly, offered a slight nod. He appreciated it. But he said nothing. He'd learned that if you're the only one speaking up, you're easily labeled the problem. Then he remembered something his mentor once told him during his early airline days. The sky has a way of showing people's true selves. Something about the altitude. People forget they're being seen. He looked around. Some passengers noticed. Most pretended not to. There was a silence shared among them all. A silent pact to not get involved. 10 minutes later, Elise returned with a paper cup, her hand barely masking contempt. "Here's your coffee," she said, leaning over and letting a few drops spill on the tray. "Hope it's strong enough." Leonard didn't respond. Then came the final blow. "I don't mean to be rude," she said loudly, "but you're not really the usual kind of passenger we see in this section. You sure you're supposed to be in this seat?" The entire cabin fell quiet. Even the man in 1B stopped typing. Leonard slowly looked up. "What kind do you usually see?" he asked, his voice steady. Elise blinked, then tried to smile. "Executives, business travelers. Just, some people try to sneak upgrades, or lie about their seat." "I didn't lie," Leonard said calmly. "You're welcome to check my boarding pass." "I already did," she muttered, suddenly unsure of herself. Leonard leaned back in his seat. He didn't have to say more. The weight of the moment had shifted, not just because of the disrespect, but because the truth was now hanging in the air, and everyone could feel it. And soon, they'd know it too, because by the time the plane landed, a quiet man in seat to see, the one ignored, mocked, and humiliated, would walk off that aircraft and head straight to a boardroom. Not to complain. She spoke quickly, her tone clipped. "Just trying to make sure everyone's being treated fairly." But Leonard heard the real message buried beneath the words, and it was written all over her face. She wasn't used to someone like him sitting up front, and the more he stayed composed, the more it unsettled her. He leaned back and let her finish whatever speech she needed to give. There was no need to defend himself. What she didn't know, what he wasn't quite ready to reveal, would shift the entire course of this flight. But as he settled into his seat, Leonard had a feeling she wasn't finished. The plane had begun its slow descent over the hills near Bakersfield. Flight attendants moved through the cabin conducting final checks. Passengers were quiet now, easing into that half-sleepy mode most enter just before landing. Leonard felt something brewing. It wasn't turbulence, it was tension. Kendra kept glancing toward him, not directly, but in that sideways, searching kind of way, like she was waiting for a reason. He took off his glasses, gently rubbed his eyes. He wasn't tired, he was assessing. This trip was meant to be routine, a check on how staff treated customers. But what he got felt less like observation and more like provocation. And it was escalating. She came by collecting cups and napkins. When she reached his row, Leonard held out his used cup and napkin with a polite expression. She stared at them like he'd handed her something offensive. "I'm not your maid," she said, sharply. A woman up front in 1A gasped. Leonard's expression didn't change. Calmly, he placed the cup on the edge of his tray. Then he looked at Kendra, truly looked at her, for the first time since boarding. "I believe that's part of your job," he said, evenly. Flight attendant. Serving the cabin. Color rose to her cheeks like a thermometer filling too fast. This wasn't the reaction she wanted. She expected outrage or silence, not this measured pushback. "I don't like your tone," she snapped. "I haven't raised it." Her voice lowered into a hiss. "I don't care who you think you are. You people think you can act like you run the place." Leonard tilted his head slightly. "You people," he repeated, coolly. And that's when everything cracked. The slap came fast, an open hand, sharp across the side of his face. It wasn't loud, but it was loud enough. A murmur swept the front rows. The man in 2A rose halfway out of his seat. A passenger in 3C gasped, drawing startled glances from nearby. A phone was already out, camera recording. Kendra froze, eyes wide. Her hand hung in the air a moment before she realized what she'd done. She stepped back, trembling slightly. Leonard didn't flinch. He didn't touch his cheek. He just stared at her, calm and quiet, and in that stillness, her fury began to collapse into panic. Passengers were whispering now. A younger flight attendant, brunette curls, softer features, rushed up from the rear. "What happened?" she asked Kendra, pulling her aside. Kendra stammered. He was being disrespectful. Leonard finally stood, slow and deliberate. He adjusted the sleeve of his sweater, glanced at the commotion behind him. Someone holding up a phone shouted, "She hit him." Everyone saw it. The younger attendant turned to Leonard. "Sir, are you all right?" "I'm fine," he said, taking a napkin to dab at a small cut on his cheekbone. Kendra was pale now, her composure gone. The brunette attendant's voice sharpened. Go to the galley. Kendra didn't move. I said go. Only then did she turn, arms stiff at her sides. Leonard sat down again, quietly. Every eye in the cabin was on him. One man leaned over. Sir, do you want to press charges? Leonard paused. Then he looked at the airline's logo stitched into the seatback. No, he said, but this won't be ignored. That's when the quiet whisper began. A woman in her mid-30s, seated in row 5, leaned over to the man beside her. That's Leonard Mayfield, she whispered. Cool. The new CEO of Norjet. Just announced last month. I saw the LinkedIn post. Retired Air Force. Industry veteran. The whisper spread fast, faster than the descent. A few phones came out. A quick search confirmed it. The man in seat to see was indeed Leonard Mayfield. Murmurs turned into disbelief, regret, awkward glances around the cabin. A man in 1B slowly stood. Sir, he said respectfully, is it true? Leonard looked up, calm and steady. Yes, he said simply, it's true. The cabin went still. Even the pilot's voice over the intercom seemed heavier now. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into San Francisco International. Crew, prepare for landing. Kendra did not return. She remained in the galley, out of sight, maybe crying, maybe trying to figure out how it had gone so wrong, so quickly. The younger attendant, her name tag read Nora, crouched gently next to Leonard's seat. Mr. Mayfield, she said, softly. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know who you were. He looked at her. You treated me with dignity before you knew anything about me. That's what counts. She flushed, nodded. We'll be reporting what happened. Leonard nodded once. Do it not because of my title. Do it because it was wrong. Phones were still out, but now people weren't recording out of curiosity. It was concern, outrage, solidarity. The man from the rear of the plane raised his voice. We're with you, Mr. Mayfield. That was wrong, and that opened the floodgates. I saw her skip him, one woman said. She poured my drink but ignored his. I heard the, you people, comment. It wasn't anger for show. It wasn't a witch hunt. It was people finally giving voice to what they'd stayed silent about. Leonard didn't make a speech. He didn't stand tall and grandstand. He simply sat, dignified, unshaken, present. The plane landed smoothly, but no one rushed to stand. Not out of compliance, out of respect. Kendra reappeared only after the wheels touched down. She looked stunned. Gone was the edge in her voice, the smug smile. She stood near the front, still. Leonard passed her on his way out. He paused. I'm not going to make a scene, he said, quietly, but this will be addressed, not just by me. She said nothing, but her eyes told the story. The gravity of what she'd done had finally hit, but the true reckoning wouldn't happen here. It would happen after, once the story left the plane, and the internet never stays quiet. Two Norjet supervisors in crisp Navy uniforms approached Leonard just beyond the jet bridge. Both carried the weight of urgency in their expressions. The taller of the two, a black man in his early 40s, with a clipped badge reading Alan Ricks, stepped forward first. Mr. Mayfield, sir, we were informed mid-flight. I'm Alan Ricks, Regional Director of Operations. First and foremost, I want to personally apologize for what occurred on board. Leonard didn't blink. I'm not here for apologies, Alan. I'm here to see accountability. The other supervisor, a white woman nearing 60 with a silver nameplate that read Terry, gave a small nod. Absolutely. We've already secured the flight reports, pulled the internal footage, and the crew member involved has been relieved of duty, while the matter is investigated. Leonard met her gaze. Make sure it's a real investigation, not just a press-friendly cover-up. Terry's jaw tightened slightly, but she kept her voice steady. Understood, sir. Leonard wasn't there to micromanage. That wasn't his leadership style, but he had no intention of letting this incident disappear behind closed doors. He'd be watching, not from a corporate suite, but from the ground level. At baggage claim, he retrieved his suitcase without assistance. No security escort, no aides. Just him and a phone buzzing non-stop in his pocket. The video had already gone viral. One clip alone had crossed 2 million views in under an hour. The caption read, "Flight attendant slaps first-class passenger. Didn't know he was the CEO." The comments came like a flood. Many applauded Leonard's composure. Others ripped into Kendra without mercy. And a vocal minority cast doubt, claiming the footage was doctored, scripted, exaggerated. None of that fazed him. He knew what happened. He knew what it meant. And he knew this moment was too big, too public to be brushed aside. Norjet had spent years building its image as modern, progressive, and inclusive, but now it was staring down a PR inferno, and the fire had started in row to see. By the time Leonard stepped into his hotel room in downtown San Mateo, he had voicemails from 3 major news channels to top-tier podcasts. and a well-known talk show host. He didn't return any of them. Not yet. Instead, he scheduled a private video meeting that evening, not with PR handlers or legal advisors, but with Norjet's internal ethics committee. These were the people who designed company values, handled staff training, and tracked employee complaints. When the call began, the tension was palpable. One woman, a Latina in her early 60s named Maritza from Human Resources, looked visibly shaken. "Mr. Mayfield," she began softly, "I saw the video, and something inside me cracked." Leonard didn't offer sympathy, just resolve. "Then we need to repair what's broken, not with press releases, with real changes." He didn't rant. He didn't raise his voice. He simply laid out the problem. How diversity training had become a box to check. How valid complaints too often died in email chains. How frontline staff were shaped by a flawed culture that tolerated subtle bias. And how silence, especially in the front of the plane, had become the most dangerous norm of all. "I wasn't hurt by a slap," he told them. "I've taken worse hits flying at Mach speeds in combat aircraft. What stung was watching an entire cabin fall silent while someone decided I didn't belong. And I don't blame them. I blame us for creating a culture where silence feels safer than standing up." No one responded at first. The quiet on the call was heavier than the slap itself. Then someone cleared their throat. "We'll get to work on this immediately," Maritza said, her voice firm now. Leonard ended the meeting without ceremony. Meanwhile, back at the airport, Kendra Whitlow was being escorted down a quiet corridor near the employee exit. Her badge had already been taken. A senior HR rep, clipboard in hand, formally informed her she was suspended pending further review. Kendra didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just walked, slowly, like someone moving through a fog of disbelief. She wasn't thinking about Leonard anymore. She was thinking about the videos, the backlash, the comments, the realization that everything she'd built, every bit of seniority and training, had unraveled in hours. Not because of a single moment, but because of something deeper, a mindset, a pattern. And while her chapter closed at that airport, another story was just beginning, in offices, living rooms, and terminals across the country. By morning, Leonard Mayfield's name was everywhere. The headlines were blunt: CEO struck by flight attendant, incident caught on camera. Airline exec assaulted in first class, staff member suspended. Black CEO mistaken for wrong kind of passenger. But none of the coverage could quite capture what this moment had become, not just a scandal, but a reckoning. No headline really captured what mattered most to Leonard. He wasn't chasing headlines or hungry for retribution. That night, in his quiet hotel room, it wasn't the sting of a handprint that kept him awake. It was what that slap symbolized: the countless, invisible insults that go unnoticed every day, or worse, accepted. A journalist from the San Francisco Ledger, a seasoned reporter with a calm, steady voice, finally reached out directly. Leonard took a long pause before agreeing to speak. "I'll talk," he said. "But it's not about me. It's about everyone who deals with this without a camera rolling, without a title to shield them." They met in a neighborhood coffee shop. No media crew, no handlers, just two people and a table by the window. Leonard spoke plainly, every word chosen with care. The piece ran that evening, not as a scandal expose, but as a provocation. When your title doesn't protect you, a CEO confronts a deeper problem. In it, Leonard shared pieces of his life. How he grew up in Oklahoma City, where his mother warned him never to raise his voice in public. "They see you before you even open your mouth," she used to say. "Don't give them an excuse." He talked about flying missions overseas, sleeping on cots in hangars, working twice as hard to sit in rooms never designed for people like him. Then he said something that resonated far beyond business: "If someone can treat me like an imposter in first class, me, the CEO, what happens to people without that title? What happens when speaking up costs them their job, or their peace?" The story went viral, not because it was scandalous, but because it was honest. Thousands began sharing their own experiences. Stories of humiliation disguised as policy, of subtle exclusions, of looks, tones, and tiny moments that said, "You don't belong here." At Norjet headquarters, real change began. Leonard didn't just release a statement. He tore up the way things had been done. A new complaint system was built from the ground up. Anonymous, accessible to passengers and employees alike, with guaranteed follow-up, not just lip service. Then came something bold: C-check, a policy requiring flight attendants to rotate cabins regularly. No more staying in comfort zones. No more unspoken rules about who gets patience and who gets protocol. Some leaders pushed back, said it was all too fast. Leonard looked them in the eye. "Too fast compared to what?" he asked. "The speed of disrespect." Meanwhile, Kendra Whitlow had become an unintentional symbol, trending online for all the wrong reasons. An old video surfaced. 2 years earlier, she'd berated a young Latino child flying solo. The pieces clicked. It wasn't a one-off. It was a pattern. Her termination came swiftly and without press release. Leonard didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He'd already said what needed saying. Days later, at an industry summit in Phoenix, Leonard stood in front of a room packed with airline executives. Most expected charts, forecasts, and future strategy. Instead, he told them a story. He described Flight 1627. The silence, the refusal, the hand that struck, not because of who he was, but because of what someone assumed. I didn't want to be recognized as the CEO that day, he told them. I wanted to be seen as a human being with a boarding pass and sore feet, someone who deserved respect. If we can't offer that to everyone on our flights, we've lost the only part of this business that matters, basic humanity. The room didn't erupt in applause. It sat still, the kind of stillness that marks real reflection. Afterward, a young black employee found him near the lobby. She looked nervous but hopeful. "Mr. Mayfield," she said, "I saw the video. What you did, it meant something. It gave me hope." He gave a small smile. "Then keep the door open for someone else. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It starts quietly, and it spreads." 2 weeks passed. As all viral stories do, the firestorm dimmed. Social media latched onto something newer, shinier, noisier. But for Leonard, the quiet wasn't peace. It was a warning. He didn't want this to be just another flare-up, a headline burned into memory, the conversation forgotten. So he returned to work. Back to Norjet's main office in San Bruno, a squat, concrete building unchanged since the early 2000s. No photographers, no announcements. Just Leonard walking through the same back door he'd once used as a junior analyst. Some staff peered at him through office windows as he passed. Their expressions weren't fear, but something deeper, respect, and maybe even relief. Too many leaders had stayed silent when it counted. Leonard hadn't. In his office, he opened a thick manila folder. Inside were nearly 200 emails, messages from customers, employees, former staff. Some just a few lines, others pages long. A woman from a regional airport wrote about being passed over 5 times for promotions, despite having trained the men who got them. A retired flight attendant described being written up after reporting a coworker who mocked passengers with accents. Different cities, different roles, same through line. Leonard sat in silence after reading. Then he knew what needed to happen next. The listening line launched the following Monday. Not a complaint hotline, a bridge, open 24/7. Anonymous or not, anyone, crew, customer, cleaner, could speak. And every word would be seen, heard, and answered. Some critics rolled their eyes, called it corporate theater. Leonard didn't care. This wasn't about looking good. This was about making sure no one ever sat in seat to see again thinking they were completely alone. Around the same time, Kendra Whitlow's lawyer released a brief statement. She was heartbroken over the events and was beginning treatment for stress and behavioral issues. Leonard read it once. He didn't respond. Not in public. He didn't have to. Instead, he sent a single company-wide memo. Dignity doesn't come with rank. It's owed to every single person who walks through our doors. That's the standard now.